Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into the exact psychological tricks that professional storytellers use to keep you from zoning out right in the middle of a story. Because honestly, whether you're writing a screenplay, drafting a novel, or honestly just trying to tell a better story at a dinner party, mastering the rhythm of your narrative is absolutely crucial.
We have absolutely all been there, right? You sit down to watch a highly anticipated film, the opening is just incredible, but then halfway through, you're suddenly way more interested in scrolling on your phone. Well, the secret to fixing that saggy metal really comes down to mastering key moments that create unstoppable momentum. It's the difference between a story that completely flatlines and one that keeps surprising you right up until the final frame.
So here is our roadmap for today. We'll uncover the secret to engagement, decode the difference between beats and plot points, map out the 5 essential story beats, talk about raising the stakes, and finally, we'll help you avoid some of those really common beginner mistakes.
All right, Section 1, the secret to engagement, the key to hooks. Let's just dive right in and uncover the overarching secret to holding your audience's attention.
Think of it this way. If the 3-act structure, which you've probably studied before, is the overarching highway of your story, then the plot points and story beats, those are the crucial landmarks and stops along the way. Because let's face it, a long stretch of empty highway is incredibly boring. The landmarks are what create change, spike the tension, and ensure we're just desperate to know what happens next.
Moving on to Section 2, beats versus plot points. Understanding turning points.
Okay, we really need to clearly separate these two concepts. A story beat acts as the living heartbeat of your screenplay. It's a small pulse that keeps the narrative alive. You know, a tiny discovery, a minor decision, a small victory, or maybe a sudden failure. Every single one of these beats keeps the blood pumping and the story moving forward. Now, a plot point, that is a much larger event. It's an earthquake that literally splits the road in two. It forces your character into an entirely new situation where they have no choice but to make difficult, narrative-altering decisions.
So here is the crucial distinction to keep in mind. While all plot points serve as beats, not all beats are monumental enough to be plot points. It's kind of like how every square is a rectangle, but not every rectangle is a square. You'll have dozens of story beats in a film to sustain the rhythm, but only a handful of true plot points that actually change the destination. Let's look at Section 3, 5 essential story beats, 5 turning points. We're going to see how this builds chronologically into the framework of most successful films.
This timeline right here gives you the chronological anatomy of a standard feature film. Now, while pacing always varies a little bit depending on the movie, hitting these 5 distinct landmarks around these specific minute markers ensures a really natural driving rhythm. So let's break down exactly what's happening at each of these stops.
The journey kicks off with the inciting incident. This is that unexpected event, a ringing phone, a car accident, a mysterious letter that disrupts the character's normal life. Without this, there literally is no journey. Then we hit the first plot point. This is the moment the character makes a decision that cannot be easily undone. They step through a doorway, they cross a bridge, they leave their ordinary world behind and fully enter the story. From this point forward, there is absolutely no turning back. As we keep going, the tension escalates at the midpoint. The story changes in a meaningful way here. Maybe it's a huge revelation or a crazy twist, and the stakes get significantly higher. Then, the tension plummets during the crushing setback of the second plot point. This is their darkest moment, where all hope seems lost. And finally, the story crests at the climax, which is that ultimate do-or-die confrontation that determines everything.
Let's actually see this in action with a quick mini-narrative. Watch how a young filmmaker's journey steps perfectly through these 5 beats. First, the inciting incident. He learns his grandfather's traditions are disappearing. Second, the first plot point, he makes the irreversible decision to document them, even though his grandfather refuses. Third, the midpoint. A major discovery. He finds old family recordings that reveal forgotten stories. Fourth, the second plot point. Complete disaster strikes. His camera breaks right before the final cultural celebration. And finally, the climax. He has to choose between desperately trying to film the event with borrowed gear or putting the lens down to just experience the moment with his family. You can see how logically this triggers one crisis after another, keeping us completely hooked the whole time.
Notice how that young filmmaker's situation just kept getting more and more intense? Well, that brings us to Section 4, raising the stakes. Higher stakes equals drama. If you take absolutely nothing else away from this explainer today, please remember this golden rule. The greater the consequences, the stronger the audience's emotional investment. You have to constantly ask yourself, what happens if my character fails?
Because if the answer is, not much, your audience is going to tune out immediately. Rising stakes are the absolute only way to create rising tension.
Higher stakes equals greater drama, for sure. Imagine a small threat compounding into an insurmountable mountain. You might start off the story risking a scraped knee, but by the climax, you're risking a broken heart or, getting eaten by a bear. The emotional or physical cost of failure has to continually climb.
Of course, engineering this kind of momentum isn't easy. So let's look at Section 5, Avoiding Common Beginner Mistakes and the Common Pitfalls.
The difference between an amateur script and a professional one usually boils down to momentum. Amateurs tend to write these long sections with repetitive conflict where nothing actually changes, or they just throw in random, illogical twists purely for shock value. Professionals, on the other hand, craft clear turning points and escalating stakes so that surprises feel both completely unexpected yet totally inevitable. The overarching professional insight here is that audiences don't stay engaged just because stuff happens. They stay engaged precisely because each event forces a fundamental change in what the character wants, fears, or believes. Every single important beat has to leave the story and the audience in a completely different place than before. So as you sit down to craft the roadmap and the landmarks for your own narrative, I want to leave you with this one question to think about. How will your next story beat leave your audience completely transformed? Think about the rhythm, really focus on the stakes, and make every single heartbeat of your story count. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and happy writing.